On behalf of VMUG, I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, Veritas Resiliency Platform, Availability for the Digital Enterprise, presented by Ryan Behiel of Veritas. Thank you for participating in today's webcast and for your continued support in the Global VMUG program. Before we begin, I have a few quick housekeeping items to go over. First, today's webcast will be recorded and available for on-demand. You'll receive a follow-up email with the on-demand link from today's webcast, so be looking out for that. Second, a Q&A session will follow today's presentation. All questions need to be entered in the question window near the bottom of your GoToWebinar screen. Third, there will be a short online evaluation that pops up as you exit the webcast. Please make sure to take a minute and let us know what you thought of today's session and what you might like to see going forward. One attendee from today's webcast will win a $100 Amazon gift card. Veritas will email the winner directly following the webcast today, so good luck. All right, let's get started. I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Ryan Behiel, Principal Technical Marketing Engineer at Veritas. Ryan, I would like to turn things over to you.
Thank you, and hi everyone. Thanks for jumping on today. So yeah, I'm Ryan from Veritas, and today we're talking about the Veritas Resiliency Platform. And for anyone familiar with the product, we've been on the market now with Resiliency Platform for about 6 years. That's when version 1 hit the street, and our current version here is 3.3.2. And initially, our main use case was all around VMware environments, and today that's very much still the same. So we still have a lot of integration and interesting features that relate to VMware environments, and have been going strong now for about 6 years with the Resiliency Platform product. So the overall view with Resiliency Platform, kind of where we fit into the market, and the kind of the high-level understanding of what we do is it's really kind of around single-click DR migration, and also stuff like workload mobility for any type of workload you might have out there. Because our most common use case is with VMware, right? So what you'll typically see out there is VMware environments on premise, and there'll be some kind of mobility, migration or DR scenario between some other environment. Usually it would be VMware, but we do support other options, right? So that could be stuff like public cloud, could be a private cloud, something like say vCloud Director, or maybe some kind of integration with a service provider, or it could again be just your own data center. So you'd have 2 VMware sites side by side where you want to move and migrate applications between the two. So that's kind of the high-level view of Resiliency Platform and overall where it fits into the IT ecosystem. And I thought I'd just start out by showing you guys a few things, kind of why you would choose Resiliency Platform, or some of the things that we do that are unique within the market out there. And overall, one thing I'd say would be, providing general predictability around these types of operations, right, around DR, around migration and workload mobility. The ability to have multiple RPOs, or to have a solution that can give you multiple choices for what kind of RPO you need. So that's something that we do deliver with Resiliency Platform with various types of replication integration. Of course, compliance, right? I mean, we all need reporting on this type of thing as well, right? So that's all fully baked into the product, and I have a bit of an example coming up for what that looks like. Now, the way I describe this typically is, it's a product that offers automation. It's not automatic, it's automated, right? So you can automate all kinds of things along the lines of, run books, start and stop, any type of DR or kind of failover orchestration. And this works within very large and even small environments, but it will support stuff like multi-tier applications, right? So it's not specific to say just moving one VM from site to site. We can actually orchestrate an entire multi-tier application to do exactly that type of thing as well. And again, flexibility. So we do offer quite a few choices as far as what type of cloud environments, for example, you can use as a target. So there are some good choices there that we have today with Resiliency Platform. When we started out, it was a more simple use case, like I say, simply VMware to VMware. But now we do offer you a fairly good choice of where your second site can be, and different cloud integrations and such. So, and the big thing again too, single click, right? So we want to make this whole process as simple as possible. So you do your initial setup, your configuration, you get things set up the way you want them to be. And then from there, the idea is you should really be able to do something like a DR, a failover, migration, takeover, any of those kinds of things, with as little as one click if you so choose, right? So that is kind of a key feature of the product, is to be able to do those kinds of things by simply just, one click, and it makes it that easy. So I wanted to first, before getting into some of the other stuff, just give you the view of the higher level architecture so you can kind of visualize what the product would look like in your own environment. So again, like I say, our most common use case is really going to be right here, where you have a VMware environment on one site, and then you have a secondary site also running a VMware environment, and that is what we see most commonly. But we do support other options where if you have VMware on site A on premise, you can also move those workloads to a public cloud. And we actually do support physical systems as well, right? So if you have those types of systems within your environment that you're also looking to protect, that's something that we do support. And as far as how we move the data, there are a few different options, right? So the resiliency platform does have a built-in data mover, and that works in one of two ways, and it sort of depends on where you're going. So in this case here, what you see, say you have a vSphere environment on site A, and then on site B you want to move that over to some public cloud. We have our own data mover that's built in that will do that, and that works at the VM level. So it'll move data, like it basically taps I/O right within the OS, and then is able to replicate that over across to a public cloud. Whereas in the second scenario, where if you have, say, a VMware environment on both sides, we actually use VMware's Behiel API, right? So what we're doing there is we're actually doing I/O filtering at the hypervisor level, and then that's the data that's being replicated between sites. So there's no footprint on your VM whatsoever. It's all done at the hypervisor level. And these two options can provide, an RPO of, we say, roughly 5 minutes, potentially a bit better depending on how good of a connection you have between the two sites, but something that you need to get, back online really quickly. That's an option where you can get around a 5-minute RPO roughly. Now, if you need better than that, like something where it is pretty much near zero or synchronous replication, we also do offer support for third-party storage, right? So that's where, a good example would be if you have two vSphere sites, here on site A and site B, and that's sitting on, some type of storage. Maybe it's NetApp, EMC, or Hitachi, whatever that might happen to be. We can do storage level replication of data as well, right? So that's potentially useful in a scenario where, if you really do need as low of an RPO as you can possibly get with some type of synchronous replication between sites, that would be your best option for how you would do that. One other thing we can do, as well as anyone out there who's using Veritas Net Backup is using that for VMware environments, we do offer Net Backup replication as an option that would also be available within the product. Now that's something that's going to support, it's going to be a higher RPO, right? So if you think of, say, backup images and doing backup image replication between sites, that's going to happen, probably typically on a daily basis or whatever you have configured for your backup policies. So it wouldn't be as quick as that instant, or 5-minute RPO here with the data mover or with array replication, but it is an interesting option for, in environments where maybe it's not as important to have that near zero RPO. And if you're already using that backup, it's kind of a bonus where you can use those backup images, replicate those, and that can kind of be your DR strategy, right? Now, the resiliency platform components, we have like a resiliency manager, which is kind of the brains of the resiliency platform operation. So that's installed on both sites, and as well as an infrastructure management server. And that's kind of the piece that goes out and talks to all the components that we're managing. And there's actually one other thing you don't see here. This is our replication appliance, but that actually installs just as a VM within a vSphere cluster. Right? Now, all of these components, they're available as OVA files, so it's a pretty easy and straightforward install process. And I'll talk a little bit more here on the next slide about public cloud and what you're doing, what you would do if you might be in a public cloud scenario. So in this case, I'm using Microsoft Azure as an example. I just thought I'd pick Azure more because the icons look kind of cool, and you get a lot of airtime with AWS these days, but maybe not quite as much with Azure. We do fully support both environments. But the most interesting thing, I think, within the cloud when it comes to resiliency platform is that in all the cloud environments we support, where there is a marketplace, we do have solution templates available. So it makes getting a resiliency platform up in a cloud environment actually quite simple, and it can be done literally in a matter of minutes. But what you see here, so in this example with Microsoft Azure, essentially the way this would work would be very much the same as if it was just VMware on this one site here to another VMware site over here. The replication process works exactly the same way. So you have your I/O tap here on your VMs that's grabbing the I/O and replicating it across to the secondary site, which in this case just happens to be Azure. And that gets written down to some type of persistent disk within the cloud environment. Now, in an AWS scenario, there can actually be one other piece in the mix here, which would be AWS S3 storage. So you can actually use that as an intermediary. That same type of functionality is coming for Azure, but today with Azure, it's just direct replication from the corporate side to the persistent storage side on Azure. Yeah. Just to pause there, any questions? Or I just thought I'd just take a quick look to see if there's anything in the chat window, but I don't believe so. One thing I didn't mention, I guess, with cloud support as well, we do support Huawei Cloud, and we're looking at a few more that are going to be coming into the mix in the fairly near future. So that's things like, your IBM Cloud and Oracle Cloud. Today, of course, full support for AWS and Azure, but going forward, certainly there will be additional cloud platforms within the mix and in our support matrix. So. So some of the challenges around IT resiliency in general that we typically see, and reasons that our customers are typically interested in the resiliency platform, it kind of comes down to three things, right? Like logical risks, infrastructure, as well as site-wide issues, right? So on the logical side, one big thing we're seeing a lot of these days, ransomware. Like that's gotten a lot of attention in recent years. But anything just like user error, right? So if you have something happen on your primary site, it's maybe not what was intended, or someone does something they weren't supposed to, anything along that line, that can cause a threat to resiliency, right? So it's prudent to have an option to recover from those kinds of scenarios. Anything like software defects, data corruption, even something like internal sabotage. I've actually seen this a couple of times myself, where someone has actually gone and, let's say, done something kind of bad at a primary site, and the customers I was working with there didn't really have any recovery strategy other than just pulling data from backups, which isn't always the quickest option, right? So having a secondary site where you're kind of in an active, or where you have systems ready to go at a moment's notice can absolutely be helpful in that scenario, right? So. And then your typical infrastructure issues, stuff like compute, storage, network. Like if anything goes down for whatever reason, or you run into some kind of hardware failure or anything along that line, maybe the cloud platform that you happen to be using goes down or experiences some kind of interruption. Hard to say what could happen in that scenario, but those types of things as well are things we can protect against. As well as your typical disaster type scenarios, right, where you have maybe some kind of weather event, or even like a political situation. You never know what it might be, but something that for whatever reason causes a disruption at one site, and is a kind of an issue within that broader geographical region. You may need to fail that over somewhere else entirely, and that's a scenario we can also protect against with resiliency platform. So those are kind of, in a nutshell, the three threats we typically see as the most common reasons why resiliency platform gets deployed, and we can protect against really any of this with resiliency platform. Now, there's always some challenges, of course, to being able to build this type of thing. The biggest, I would say, and probably most people would agree, it's always dollars, right? It does cost money to do this. It's not free. In more recent years, stuff like cloud integration, we have tried to minimize that, right? So understanding that, it's not entirely cheap to duplicate a data center configuration, right? To have two sites running versus just one. The cloud does help that, certainly, right? You can get some cost efficiencies out of using cloud as a secondary or as a target site. So that's kind of where a lot of the development we've done with resiliency platform has focused in recent years. But still, far and away, that's really the biggest issue, or the biggest challenge we see out there for our customers to adopt a full resiliency strategy, right? It does cost, or it can cost, a lot of money. Right? One thing that's a little less common that we actually have a pretty good solution for, if you have different types of infrastructure across different sites, right? So sometimes that can make it a bit of a challenge to being, truly resilient. To have solutions that are kind of, hardware or software agnostic is key in kind of eliminating that as being a real challenge to adopting resiliency. And at Veritas, that's one of the things that we've always sort of strived for, is to be that vendor where we can be basically, heterogeneous in terms of what kind of infrastructure you can deploy our products on. Right? And of course, validation and compliance. So, basically making sure your applications and information, is available, and it meets compliance and regulatory requirements is also a challenge as well. And again, that can kind of tie back into the dollars and cents issue, right? Is that it's not necessarily cheap to build a solution that gives you full resiliency within an entire enterprise environment. So that's what we typically see out there in the market. But like I say, we are working towards kind of minimizing the overall dollar impact. We've updated our licensing model recently here that's actually a fairly significant benefit for most customers. So there's some good things coming down the pipe with that one as well. Now, as far as how we solve some of these challenges, and to give you kind of a look at how this could potentially look in your environment, right? So when I was talking about hardware agnostic, or infrastructure agnostic, what I'm saying there is really it can work on almost anything you're running today. So that could be really any kind of hardware, any kind of storage that you're using. We don't really care. At the end of the day, it can work on just about anything. So in your on-site scenario today, like this could be a combination of really any type of infrastructure out there. Doesn't really matter to us. It's all essentially the same in that regard. And depending on where you're going, like if you have two sites, your second one, it could be another VMware site, or like I say, it could be something else. It could be cloud. It could be something like a vCloud Director or a service provider integration. We even offer managed services as well, right? So it's fairly flexible as far as the ways you can deploy this, or the types of technologies we can support. And some of the things listed here, these are just a few. The actual support matrix does have more than this on there, but these are sort of the most common things that we see out there, from third-party storage replication as well as cloud integration, right? So the way this is offered, I would say the most common is really still here. We're at the kind of the point where most customers are doing self-managed resiliency, right? So that's just a scenario where you have two or more sites that you're managing yourself, your typical configurations, and you want to set up some kind of resiliency solution to cover those types of sites, right, that you're managing on your own. That's certainly our most common use case. Although we do see in certain situations as well, like integration with service providers, right? So if you happen to work with any service providers that are running something like, for example, vCloud Director, that is something that we could integrate with and is available as an option. A third thing that we're doing, we actually have a managed service option as well, right? So if you have some type of on-premise data center and you're looking for a managed service to do something like DRAS, that is a solution that we offer today, and it's delivered jointly with DXC. So like I say, it is a fully managed solution, which is nice in the sense that it kind of keeps management overhead on your part to a minimum. And it's fairly slick. Once it's all set up and running, there's really not a whole lot the end user has to do. At that point, you're kind of in that scenario where, you get that option to do single-click failover, testing, recovery, anything along that line. And it's all managed by DXC. So it's another option that we have out there as far as how this can be delivered. But the most common, I would say, is still sort of self-managed, right, where our customers will have, two sites, typically VMware, and they're managing resiliency between those two using our platform. And overall, really getting that set up is honestly not that difficult. Like I say, all the platform components install as OVA files. The setup itself really doesn't take all that long. And then once you're set up, you can manage everything really with a single click from a pretty intuitive user interface. So again, ensuring predictability is kind of what we're going for here, right? Or making things as predictable and as easy as possible. We don't want to obviously, create a solution where it's going to be difficult to move something between, say, VMware in a cloud or VMware in another VMware environment. We want to make this as easy as possible for end users, given that, when you need to do something like this, like if it's in a DR scenario, most of the time you're never really going to know how it's going to ensue, right? Or what's going to happen to create that scenario. So it's, we're trying to eliminate as much of the kind of the manual processes or manual intervention required in that type of scenario, and making things overall easy and predictable for when something like that does happen. And when you need to get back up online in a hurry, making that whole experience simple and predictable, right, and meeting the service levels that you might have. And also giving you kind of the flexibility to adopt multi-clouds, right? And we understand that, obviously today cloud is a big factor for a lot of customers out there. But it's not necessarily just going to be one cloud, right? So you may have, a couple clouds in the mix, and being able to do, movement or application mobility between those clouds can sometimes be a challenge, right? So having a solution or a tool to make that simple and to kind of streamline that whole process was another big goal that we had with Resiliency Platform. And that's sort of where we are today, is we do offer pretty good cloud support as well as support for on-premise workloads, providing a really consistent experience across that whole spectrum. In fact, from within the product, the end users, the only thing they're really going to see that's different is you'll see, a cloud data center has a slightly different icon within the platform, but how it would work and how it would be set up and all that would be almost essentially the same thing. So it makes that experience fairly standard, predictable, and it's fairly streamlined across any of the platforms we support. So some of the components here that I thought I'd call out would be, our typical use cases. Like I said, it's primarily VMware to VMware. So you have two on-premise sites, one of which is VMware, and your second is also VMware on the other side. That's definitely the most common, and the second most common would be, going from a VMware environment to a cloud. And these are the ones that we support today. Like I say, there are more coming. But this is where it is currently. So anything within Azure or AWS. Also Huawei and stuff like OpenStack, if there's anyone out there using OpenStack or potentially a service provider, that is also supported. But these two are far and away our most common use cases. It's getting to be pretty even at this point, I would say, between on-prem to on-prem as well as on-prem to cloud. But again, the DRAS use case is an interesting one as well. Whether it's vCloud Director or whether you're using the managed service that we provide with DXC, that is kind of the third use case that we typically see out there. But pretty good mix of support depending on what you're doing. There's a situation that covers just about everything out there. And some of the key features, so I mean, probably the biggest one, you hear this a lot out there, but the idea of a single pane of glass. So, but having one solution that can manage DR across, an entire IT environment, right? And that could be across multiple sites, across multiple different types of technologies. And that can also be from things like on-prem to a cloud, right? Or so, meaning that it doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing at each site. But that is kind of the biggest thing that we were aiming for initially when putting the product out there, is to to give you one solution that can cover multiple different use cases as well as different types of technologies. And then also something that I'll get into here, so managing DR at the business service level, right? So looking at this not just as a system level thing, but we're looking at it more as a business service, right? So you have I would say a website, for example, that represents your business service. Well, that could have a whole bunch of different components, running behind the scenes. That all need to be sort of managed as one, right, as one logical entity. So we have an interesting way that can be done. And of course, reporting. So we do offer the option for both scheduled and on-demand and historical reporting as well. So you can kind of look back over a period of time to see what's been going on within an environment. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is something we call DR rehearsals. So this is where we can actually offer the ability to test systems that you're managing with Resiliency Platform in isolation, just so you can ensure they actually are going to work in the event of a DR situation, right? So another thing that can be useful for is if you're trying to test systems that are maybe newly patched or things along that line, you can bring those up in a rehearsal network or in an isolated environment, and then play and test those and use those systems just as if they were production, just to get the feel for how they're working, like if they're working, if there's any issues. Do that in complete isolation. If you run into anything, that can be corrected, and then once you're done with testing, the Resiliency Platform environment can manage the cleanup of all that, so it returns things back to normal quite simply. And then again, providing different RPOs and RTOs within a single solution, right? So understanding that you may not necessarily need, say a 5-minute or pretty much a near zero RPO, depending on what you're doing. Maybe a 1-day RPO is good enough, and that's where something like that net backup integration could come into play. But giving you some options and flexibility around the types and the levels of RPO that you can achieve within one product is another thing that we bring to the table here. This is a quick view of the user interface of some of the things that you'll see when you log in, the dashboards, and it's a fairly new UI. It's all HTML5 based, and I have a couple more screenshots of that coming up, but that's kind of the quick view of what it'll look like when you log in. So this is actually, personally, even though it looks quite simple, it's my favorite view. So this is what I have it set in my own test environment to see when I log in. And this is a pretty simplistic example that I have here as a screenshot, but we had one data center here in Silicon Valley, and then there was another one at our India office and our engineering site. And we had Resiliency Platform configured to manage that configuration between these two data centers. And here, like you say, it's a simple thing, but it's actually kind of nice to see that visual representation, right? So you can actually go and drill down here into the different menus to see what you have that you're managing here at this data center. And then you can see the same thing for this data center over here. And having that world or that actual visual representation of where they are sometimes can make things a little easier. With 2 sites, it's really not that big of a thing, but when you have multiple sites in the mix, that's where this can actually become really nice. So you can quickly see, hey, here's my primary sites over here. Here's where I'm replicating to or where I'm failing over. And you can see right there from this world view exactly what's going on within each one of those configurations that you might have set up. So, first-time users, there's a bit of a wizard or a guidance tool that helps you kind of navigate the product, but quite frankly, it's pretty simple. Anyone who's used vCenter, right, which all of you folks probably have, this will be as easy, if not easier, to navigate through. So about 5 minutes, you can make your way through the product for the most part and wouldn't have any real issues. So. You can also see little things like sort of the most recent things that you've done, right? So if you have multiple people using the platform as an example, and you kind of want to get a feel for what's been done, or maybe you want to go rerun an operation that someone else performed, a couple little things that we provide here make that fairly easy. So you can just click and see the kind of the most recent history. As well as up here, we've added in some quick actions. This is a new thing that's been done in a more recent release where we're making it a little easier to get to the things that you're going to most likely look at and see when you log onto the product. So I want to talk a bit here a little bit about what we call a virtual business service. And this is something that I believe is fairly unique to Veritas out there as far as kind of how we're managing kind of application or business service level failover. So essentially what a business service is, as you can kind of see here in this example, and what I mentioned before is if you think of it as like a website or something along that line, right? it's going to be an overall system. Like, it's not really ever going to be just one server. I mean, it could be, but in larger enterprise examples, typically you're going to have quite a few systems supporting that particular website, whatever it may happen to be. And usually that's going to be some kind of tiered configuration like this, right, where you have your database backend, some kind of app tier, and then a bunch of web servers out there serving out to the internet. And that's all acting as one system, right? If any part of this goes down, then the user experience when they log on to example.com or whatever that site may be, it's not going to work. It doesn't really matter if it's a failure here, if it's here, or if it's down here in the database tier. They all sort of need to work in parallel for this service to be available. So the virtual business service is really a construct within the Resiliency Platform product that allows us to take that into account, right? So that you can group and you can organize your systems into the tiers that they represent. And so at this point, what it'll again, it's sorry guys. I might have just clicked the wrong button here. Hopefully we're still good to go, but are we still running?
Yep, you're still good, Ryan.
Oh, still good. Okay, sorry guys. Yeah, my bad. That's I always end up with a system software push at the worst possible times, right? But yeah, so the virtual business service, we think of this like, again, as this whole service that you want to manage as one logical entity, whatever that may happen to be under the covers, and then it may be more simple than this, it may be more complex. This is that grouping that allows you to do that. So really in one click, you could actually fail over this entire application to a secondary site that simply. Another thing I think that's interesting that we build into this product is that it doesn't actually have to be the same configuration at each site, right? So you can have something like this. This could even possibly be physical servers on one site, and that could actually be failed over to a much smaller footprint on a secondary site. Something that you might have in place just to kind of keep going until you get your main site back up online. So there's a few interesting things like that we've taken into account, but the overall goal here was that we wanted to enable our users to be able to manage, their business services and not necessarily just individual systems, right? So you get the choice, but if you do need to manage anything at that service level, this is an interesting construct for how you can do that within a Resiliency Platform. A couple of views of the screen here that you would see. This is probably one of the more common views that a user is going to see within the product. So the activities window. This is just going through all the different things that may have completed within a typical environment. One that you actually don't see here, but that I like myself, is that you can customize how you want a DR workflow to go. You can actually kind of pick and choose the steps yourself, so you can entirely define what gets done as part of a DR or failover process. One thing you can do also, you can actually introduce custom scripts into a process like that, right? So you can have Resiliency Platform execute a script, against possibly some data set as part of a DR workflow. And if you have a script that actually returns any kind of data or values, you can actually visualize that output right here within the activities window. So it's kind of a neat feature that we offer, and it gives you that ability to fully customize the workflow that you may have, right? So if there was an option you were looking to include as part of a workflow that wasn't standard or like a system configurable thing within the platform, that's something that you can script, then basically Resiliency Platform can execute that. So, and it is nice to be able to use the platform here to see the results of some script you might go and execute. So the other thing, too, that you'll see here is risk. So I have a little quick video here that should run through this. So what we're going to do first is I'll just expand one of the details here to give you an idea of a bit more of the content that you'll see within the details view if you want to get down into the details. Apologies here, that screenshot was not the best one, but you can kind of drill down into each one of the individual steps to see what's going on. And then here's where you actually see some of the risks that Resiliency Platform has identified in this particular scenario, right? So we have, I think, about 100 risk signatures out of the box. So there's actually quite a few things that Resiliency Platform can pick up on. A big one is replication lag, right? So that's something where, if you have lag between two sites, that can be a pretty big risk in a scenario where you actually do need to run a failover. So all those kinds of things we can identify here, and this again goes into reports as well that you can run or that you can schedule that can be entirely automated. But yeah, it's an interesting feature as far as how many risks we can actually pick up straight out of the box, right? So in this one is a pretty good example is that there's an older version of the replication VIB that we use to move data between sites. That's something that could potentially cause an issue. So there's pretty good identification of risk so that you don't end up in a scenario where you go and run a failover or a takeover and there's something wrong, right? And again, with reporting, certainly we offer a few different options. So you can do either on-demand or scheduled reporting, and it does offer a history as well. So you can run reports that really go back to pretty much the first day where you install Resiliency Platform. So you can kind of get that historical analysis view of various different components that we report against. But there's some pretty good reports, and like I say, the risk signatures all flow into reports as well. So with all the risk signatures that we offer, like I say, there's around 100 out of the box. You can kind of report on one or on any, or you can customize these however you need. And of course, they can all be emailed out to whoever you need to see these reports, and again, run on demand as well. So if you need to see something that's going on right now at this particular moment, you can log on and just run a report on demand, and you'll get something pretty quickly. So. Now, as some of you guys out there, you probably used like typical VMware tools like vSphere replication, and certainly SRM is a good one, right? So you might be thinking, so where are the differences between something like, say, vSphere replication or SRM and Resiliency Platform? So how do those two things sort of distinguish each other? And in all honesty, so if you look at SRM, there is a lot of similarity between what SRM and what we're doing. The biggest thing and how I typically describe it is, when you're using vSphere replication or SRM, they're great, within a VMware environment, but you're sort of within that ecosystem, right? So I do believe now that SRM does support VMC on AWS, but if, for example, you had a VMware site on-prem, and then you wanted to do some type of HADR to, a site on Azure, right, or as the example we saw at the beginning, that's something where Resiliency Platform can come in, right? So we do offer a few additional integrations on the cloud front, as well as using things like, the Veritas Net Backup solution or other Veritas products. So we have a few more options around where you can actually move data, right? So it, could be within VMware, or it could be outside of that scope as well. And that's kind of the biggest thing, the Resiliency Platform, I would say, or how it differentiates itself versus kind of native VMware tools. Automated rehearsals, I guess I have mentioned that, but that is a good one to note. I believe you can do that with SRM, but just so you guys do know that is fully available within Resiliency Platform. So again, being able to test your systems, in an isolated rehearsal network on your DR site, it's a pretty cool feature where you temporarily provision systems and create temp snapshots of the disks. Then you can then go and use and test those systems just as if they were production. When you no longer need it, hit a button and it all goes away. So that's kind of a cool feature that that can do a lot of interesting things for users. This is a bit more technical view of our data mover appliance, so how this thing actually works. So remember, like I say, the appliances for Resiliency Platform, or the Resiliency Platform solution, it installs entirely as OVAs, so it's all virtual. There's no physical system requirement here, and the replication appliance is no exception. So it's, again, just an OVA that gets imported and installed within a VMware environment. And depending on where you're going, there's a few different ways that this could work. But typically it'll either be an in-guest tap, or it'll be at the VIO or the hypervisor level. And then the data can be moved from that environment really to any one of these platforms, quite easily. It provides a pretty low RPO of around 5 minutes. We do offer, like I say, hypervisor-based replication or in-guest or VM-based replication. And the way it works, like I say, it's pretty efficient to get down to about a 5 or even better 5-minute RPO is pretty reasonable, and will cover the needs of most workloads out there. So there's not a whole lot involved in setting this up either, which is kind of nice. But to get this working is fairly simple, fairly easy, and we do support quite a wide range of technology. Our most common, like I say, it is definitely going to be the hypervisor-based replication where we're using VMware VIO, and the reason for that is it's maybe a little bit easier to set up, but also then there is no requirement to have any kind of software running within a VM guest itself, right? So that's kind of the big advantage there to using VMware to another VMware environment. Some of the parameters are configurable too, so depending on the bandwidth you have between these two appliances, what you'll see here is that we do a bulk transfer of data every 2 minutes. That's actually the default configuration, but it is entirely configurable. So you can actually set that to really just push data as soon as it comes in. And you do that in a situation where you have a really good high bandwidth or reliable connection between the two. Typically in that scenario, we say, just put it on the wire and you'll be okay. But there are options for, if you maybe don't have that, or if there is a bit more lag between your two sites, there's different ways you can configure the appliance to take things like that into account. Yeah, worth mentioning here too. I think I touched briefly initially on the Azure deployment and how we offer the solution as a solution template within the marketplace, both in AWS and Azure. And that is true for the entire solution, or also just something like, say, the appliance, right? So if you ever needed to scale up or add more replication appliances, depending on the size of your environment, It's really easy to do that, of course, within the VMware environment. You just simply, import another OVA file, configure the appliance, and you're good to go. Within a cloud scenario, it is pretty much just as easy. So we have solution templates available for just single appliances as well. So you can go and deploy that process versus more of a command line driven or a less user friendly option within a cloud scenario. And another interesting thing that we do, if you do have physical systems that are out there and there's possibly some interest or use case for having like a physical to virtual HADR type of scenario, this is a solution that we actually still do offer today and will for the foreseeable future. So there is the ability to do data movement between physical systems on-prem and another site here running VMware, and also vice versa. So it's a good way, if you do have physical systems that you're also thinking possibly about migrating to VMware, this would be one other option you could use to do something like that. But the main thing here, if you have something at a primary site where you are still running on physical systems for whatever reason, but you don't want to do that on a secondary site, which is a fairly common scenario, that is an option that we do have available still within the resiliency platform. And that'll work on, anything from just a single system right all the way up to a multi-tier virtual business service like what we saw on the previous slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit as well about Resiliency Platform and what we do with some other Veritas products or some of the integrations that we offer with the other products we have out there. And I just thought I'd take a quick pause here to see if there were any questions before jumping into that. It doesn't look like it. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit here about what we're doing with some of our other products. And it's stuff that probably a lot of you guys have heard of. There has been a bit of a name change here for something that we now call InfoScale, but anyone out there using the InfoScale solution, which was formerly known as Veritas Storage Foundation, Veritas Cluster Server, we do have integration with that solution. So we can actually, with Resiliency Platform, we can control the operations of an InfoScale cluster, giving you that whole full scope, kind of end-to-end management capability for an environment that has, both like a really highly available application requirement, as well as something where maybe you want to do replication using some other type of technology. But anyone out there who has InfoScale or who is running, formerly Veritas Cluster Server, or now known as InfoScale Availability, those clusters actually can be controlled and integrated into the Resiliency Platform, right? And that, again, can all still be managed with one single click. So it just gives you another option for, basically pulling in multiple solutions into that one single pane of glass or single platform to do HADR operations. And of course, Net Backup. So that's probably still our biggest or our best known product out there. And really since version 2.0 of Resiliency Platform, we have offered integration with Net Backup. So essentially what that means is if you're using Net Backup today to back up your VMware environment, and suppose you actually have two Net Backup sites, right? So you have site one and you're using Net Backup replication here called AIR to move that data to a secondary site that's also being managed by Net Backup. So with Resiliency Platform now, we're able to essentially orchestrate that entire process. And what that means is that instead of, say doing manual backups, at the policy level, and the same deal on the restores, doing individual restores one by one, Resiliency Platform can actually control this process, meaning that you could actually do stuff like bulk restores, right? So say, for example, you created a virtual business service that you were managing with Resiliency Platform, and the way you wanted to move that data between sites was just using the backup images for those systems. So you can do that with Resiliency Platform, again, just by creating that virtual business service, and then on a failover or a takeover or any kind of DR scenario, just that one single click, and then you can be back online on your DR site, all from backup data or all from using backup images. So what it's really doing is it's just restoring those backup images that you might have over here, but in this case, it would actually restore all the images related to every system within that virtual business service, right? So that can be kind of a nice thing if you have multiple, maybe 10, 20 systems or, hundreds or even thousands of systems that you want to restore and do it in bulk, right? Because it's not entirely simple to do that using Net Backup natively. You'd have to either do individual restores or you'd have to write some kind of script that would manage that multi-system restore all as one process. But Resiliency Platform provides that graphical review and kind of management for being able to do restores of multiple systems simultaneously. So it makes that whole process quite straightforward. And again, it gives you the option to be able to use your existing backup data for DR purposes, right? And wrapped around in that one whole orchestration engine, which is Resiliency Platform. Now, there's a couple of new things coming in 2019 that I thought were kind of interesting to talk about. And again, just before that, I wanted to double check again to see if we have any questions. Looks like clear here, so nothing yet. So we'll keep going, and if I'll just keep an eye on the questions, if anything comes in, we'll be sure to get to it. But some of the roadmap features that we have coming up fairly soon, and this won't be actually later in 2019. It actually should be on the street probably within even the next couple months. Something interesting we're doing here with Amazon Web Services initially, and this will expand out to additional cloud platforms in the future. But it's an interesting option where users today, if you're using Net Backup or you're an existing Net Backup customer, and you're using cloud as a target for your backup images, right? So that's a fairly common scenario that we see out there today with a lot of our Net Backup customers. Certainly, in the last few years, a lot of people have tried to get away from, storing backup images on site, and they're using stuff like AWS S3 to store backup copies because it can be, fairly cost effective to do that. Now, with that solution on its own, in order to be able to use the data that you have here that you write with Net Backup over here into the cloud, you basically have to restore it. So you don't really have any good option to just go and kind of pull that data out of there and then go and use it, within Amazon for some other purpose. To be able to use that, you would have to go through Net Backup and initiate a restore process and then kind of build out a system and then kind of do things manually to get your system back online. So coming here in the fairly near future with Resiliency Platform, as we're going to offer users an option. So any Net Backup customer who wants to use Amazon as a target for backups will be able to introduce Resiliency Platform into this mix so that Resiliency Platform will actually be able to spin up live systems within AWS using backup data, right? So we'll be able to take that backup image that's sitting here that was written from on-prem into Amazon with Net Backup. We'll be able to take that image and then create basically a live system, which would be an EC2 instance and an EBS volume within Amazon that you could then go and use just as a production system within AWS. And that'll be a feature that'll be enabled by Resiliency Platform. So it'll manage the creation of that system using the backup copy that's sitting here within Amazon S3. So that'll be kind of an interesting option for a few different things. The one thing could be that if you have a system that you want to, migrate, for example, to the cloud, you have an on-premise system and you want to do a cloud migration. So all you have to do in that case is you run a Net Backup, a standard Net Backup backup. That's going to write an image here into the cloud. Then a Resiliency Platform can then go in and then take that image and actually kind of transform that into a live system or a live server that you'd be using within S3. So that's one interesting use case for this type of solution. And like I say, it's coming in roughly the July timeframe. This summer is sort of what I'm quoting. And initially, this will be available for Amazon, but we do expect to expand this out to Azure here in the relatively near future as well. So it's something kind of cool that's coming down the pipe with Resiliency Platform. Gives you that ability to, again, to use your backup solution that you may already have with Net Backup for some other purpose, right? And it makes that migration into AWS quite easy with data and a solution that you would potentially already be using anyway. And a couple other things that I thought were cool to mention that will also be available roughly in that summer time frame are here is what we call optimized recovery and instant restore integration. I'll talk a bit about this one first. So anyone out there who's, whether it's using Net Backup or whether it's some other platform, a lot of solutions out there, they're doing this thing we call instant restore. It's the ability to basically power on a backup image right away or instantly, assuming it was done as a VMware backup, and then using that image and using something like, say, storage vMotion to move that back into production, basically giving you that instant access to data that would otherwise just have to be restored kind of the traditional way by copying data back to your production system. So instant restore is a lot of interesting upsides to using that type of tech within a backup solution. And in the near future, with Resiliency Platform, with that Net Backup integration, this will actually be enabled within that particular integration, meaning that if you're using Net Backup for DR purposes, and that's how you're replicating data between sites, if you wanted to go, say, do a restore or, say, a takeover at your secondary site, you're still going to have that RPO that's going to be probably around, 1 day or for whatever your backup schedule looks like. But now with instant restore integration, the RTO is going to be significantly less, right? So you can basically just say, let's do a takeover. You shut down your system on primary. You want to bring it back up on your secondary site. Now you can actually use instant restore to power that backup image on right away. So it gives you the feeling that it really is is almost zero or near zero RTO. So you can get your system online very quickly, despite the fact that your replication was actually done using backup images that may not have been moved for roughly a day or whatever your backup schedule happens to be. So that'll make things a little quicker, and it will give you that sort of zero or really low RTO option when you're using the net backup integration that we offer today. And another interesting thing, too, that we were asked about this by several customers and are going to be implementing this for this kind of July timeframe as well, is what we call optimized recovery. So today, if you think of, say, you use the most simple example, is you have a VM on one site, and then say you have another VM on the second site that you want to fail over to, or where you're configuring that protection group between those two systems. Today, the way you would do that would be that you would select your RPO or your RTO option. And let's say you wanted something like that was roughly 5 minutes, so you were going to use the integrated resiliency platform data mover to move that data from site A to site B. So at the moment, that would be the only option you would have for that particular system. But say that VM, maybe you also wanted to have the ability to do, a takeover or migration with data that was not instantly replicated, or using something like, say, backup images. Or maybe you needed to have another option where you were providing basically a zero RPO, where you needed that synchronous replication between sites. At the moment, you only really get one option for how you're doing data movement between sites, but going forward, we'll actually give you multiple options or multiple SLOs that you can choose from that all can be implemented against one system on the source side, right? So it gives you some options around how you want to do a restore or a failover, and it basically means that you don't have to use just one data mover. You can use multiple if that does make sense for your particular environment. Now, this is going to work with, of course, VMware to VMware site, and it'll also work between VMware and a cloud site. So this would be, initially it'll be AWS and Azure, and that will expand out as we enable cloud platforms in the future. So, another thing to mention with that too is if you say you have, a pretty common configuration is going to be 2 sites, right? But that's by no means a limitation that we have. We support pretty much as many sites as you have, so there is no limitation on how many sites you can integrate into Resiliency Platform. Another interesting use case for this could be that you may want really quick or really kind of like 5 minute or less RPO between site 1 and site 2, but then maybe you want to do something else, something like, say, a backup image replication between site 1 and site 3, right, if you have a 3rd or 4th or 5th site. So that's another interesting use case for this type of tech, is that you can do really quick replication to one site, and then maybe something a little slower for a dev or test site, or something where there's a lower priority where you don't need that instant replication. So, and I think that's overall roughly what I wanted to cover with Resiliency Platform. I just thought I'd see if there were any questions out there or any comments.
Yeah, Ryan, you've got a question here. It says, once VMs are restored from net backup, can I also make sure the VMs will be backed up again in the new site?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, thanks for answering or for asking that one. So absolutely, and so that would actually be covered natively within net backup. So the policy that you would configure within net backup that you would then link to Resiliency Platform, that exact scenario will be covered as part of that. So you wouldn't have to worry, like once you do a restore, it's kind of like it's automatic or kind of an intelligent policy that understands that, hey, now I've got this newly restored system. We need to back that up as well, and it'll either just go and do that automatically, or it won't. So you have the option either way. But yes, you would absolutely be able to do that automatically as part of the configuration process for sure. Yep.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
We can give it another minute or so and see if we have any more questions.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, a couple of things I can mention to you guys. Oh, one, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, one just came in. It says, how does Veritas Resiliency Platform differ from Zerto?
Yeah, good question again. So, so I won't say too much here because I know Zerto, they have an upcoming release, I believe, this year where they're focusing on a couple of new things that I don't believe they've always kind of traditionally looked at. So I know they are kind of looking more down the lines of backup and restore as well. So I will have to say that there is a lot of similarity between the two products. The way I typically explain that is, in my view, kind of the biggest difference between the two is Zerto is really mainly focused on, it's going to be virtual infrastructure, right? So, their use cases are similar, But as far as I know, they don't have support for stuff like, say, physical systems. So if you have that scenario where maybe you do have still some physical systems, and you want to create a a two-site configuration between that and maybe something that's VMware, or maybe even something that's physical on both sides. Stuff like that, I don't believe is available with Zerto. And also like the option to pull in other products like Net Backup, for example. So if you're a current Net Backup customer, there isn't any integration that Zerto would have to do something like that, for example, or like another Veritas product like InfoScale, one of the things I mentioned here. That's something else that we can kind of pull into the mix with Resiliency Platform. So overall, Zerto versus Resiliency Platform, the functionality is very similar, but I would say our support matrix, or the scope of what we can kind of bring in or support within the platform, we do have a bit more. We do offer a bit more than I believe what Zerto is currently doing. Yeah, and one thing we're doing, I know Zerto, I will have to call this out, they actually do a pretty interesting job with some of their analytics, and that's also something that we're working on that I actually didn't mention here, so it's worth mentioning now. Some of the stuff that you will see going forward with Resiliency Platform, it'll be included as our risk signatures, but also as kind of more of an analytics option. So it'll be things along the lines of, say, replication lag, right? So say, for example, you wanted to, to try and identify the best you could when there might be more times where there'd be more likely to see replication lag between two sites or between two systems. So we have the tech, or kind of the basis to do that today, and going forward we are going to have some options that'll look more along the lines of sort of analytics. So you could understand a little bit better or get some kind of predictive idea of something like, say, your replication lag. Here's when it might be good, here's when it might be bad, based on what we've historically seen over the course of the the product history. So we are kind of going down that path as well, trying to incorporate some analytics pieces into the platform for future releases. And another thing, of course, we're doing is we have pretty reasonable cloud support today, but we are, of course, always looking to to evolve that ecosystem and to support more and more infrastructure out there. So the next few that we're looking at, probably Google Cloud Platform, IBM Cloud, and Oracle Cloud, are the ones that I think are kind of most high on our priority list at the moment. So that's the other thing we'll be sort of expanding out here in the near future, is additional cloud platform support.
Great. We have another question here. It says, so Net Backup cannot do instant restore in the cloud today, but with Resiliency Platform integration coming this summer, will that be possible?
Yeah, so a good question. So I'll go back to that slide here. So, and that's actually a really good line to draw between, say, instant restore and this particular feature, because that is sort of essentially what this is. So using Resiliency Platform, I don't want to say instant, I kind of call it near instant, because there will still be some time required to basically, and again, convert isn't quite the right word, but basically to use a backup image that's sitting here within Amazon S3. So to be able to take that image and then bring that back online, as in this case an EC2 instance with an attached EBS volume, it will be near instant. I've actually seen demos of this myself, and it can happen, in as little as a couple minutes, depending on the size of the system that you're bringing online. So yeah, this would be very much exactly that. It would be kind of that idea of having instant recovery in the cloud. And it has the additional benefit too of, like, this is kind of a newly created system, so this is something that maybe didn't even exist prior to running that restore, right? So it's a system that could have existed over here on-prem. You then write a backup of that system over here, be nothing in AWS, but then you go in and do this restore, this instant cloud recovery option, and all of a sudden, using that same backup image that came from on-prem, you now have a live system running within Amazon, all in a matter of potentially as little as a couple minutes. So yeah, that will be available this summer. Like I say, first we're going to support Amazon Web Services, and that will be coming to Azure certainly as the second platform, and then again we'll expand that out sort of as things go along. The big thing that we need here, the reason why we're going with AWS first, is because we already have an existing integration with Amazon S3 within Resiliency Platform, and so we're building that for Microsoft Azure as well right now. But that's why you see AWS support here first, as well as just overall markets, kind of place in the market. And AWS is they have a lot of customers out there right now, so we went with AWS first, and we'll be expanding that out in the future.
Great, thank you. There's one last question in here. It says, how does licensing work? Is it per VM or per vCPU?
Yeah, it's CPU based, or it's system based at this point. So there used to be another option where we would do licensing based on data volume, but we've eliminated that. So it's now essentially really just based on the systems that you actually need to manage within Resiliency Platform. Yeah. So if it's physical, it would be per core. Virtual, it would be vCPU. So yeah, it's the only option now that we offer, keeping it fairly simple.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. I don't see any other questions coming in. Do you have any comments or key takeaways that you would like to add?
Nothing much, guys. Just like I say, this was kind of the most interesting feature that I think we're developing here going forward. And the next release, so it's going to be version 3.4. That's going to be roughly the July timeframe. But yeah, for anyone who's interested in particular something along this line, it's not out there yet. But if that does look appealing to you, there may be an option for some kind of early adopters or some beta software out there. So something just to keep in mind if this did appear interesting. Again, yeah, like the last things I'd mentioned to you guys, if you are looking at a solution like this and, you have, say, an on-prem VMware site and something in the cloud here as your secondary site, we are available in both the AWS marketplace as well as the Azure marketplace. So getting Resiliency Platform up and running, if you wanted to test it out in any of those types of environments, it's really quite simple. You just use, in the AWS case, a CloudFormation template, or in Azure, there's an ARM template up there. Literally, you can have Resiliency Platform up and running within minutes using either of those two options. There's a few good videos out there that will walk through that whole process as well. But in general, yeah, to test this out, with any kind of cloud platform out there, if you were curious, it's available within the marketplace, and it's quite easy and simple to get up and running. So yeah, so check that out. And yeah, there's a couple handouts here for you guys. You'll get this presentation as well as the data sheet, just giving you a fuller idea of all the different systems that are supported. And certainly for any questions or anything at all, by all means, feel free to reach out, and more than happy to have a conversation.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for taking the time to speak to us today. One attendee from today's webcast will win a $100 Amazon gift card, and Veritas will email the winner directly following the webcast today. And as a reminder, you will receive a follow-up email with the on-demand link from today's webcast. And to find out more about the VMUG webcast program, you can visit vmug.com/learn. And please make sure to complete the short online evaluation that will pop up as you exit the webcast, and let us know how you thought today's session went. And from all of us here at VMUG, thank you, and have a great rest of your day.